Hello everyone and welcome to the channel. I'm Emmanuel, I'm an Airbus pilot, and in today's video let's have a look at another common flight simmer mistake. That is departing with less than the required amount of fuel on board. Now, you can see I'm currently standing here 5,460 kilograms of fuel on board for my flight from Cologne to Berlin, and I have loaded my airplane exactly according to SimBrief. Now that's where the mistake starts. Most flight simmers, when they load up their airplane, they simply go into the FedEx menu or whatever the applicable other aircraft is. They go to mass and balance and they load in exactly what is suggested by SimBrief. Now, that might seem like the easy thing to do for most people, but you can kind of see where I'm going with this. Plant fuel 5,556, fuel and tanks 5,462. Now let's have a look at the associated flight plan, and then I'll tell you how this would be mitigated in the real world. Now, when you're looking at the flight plan, you always got a fuel section in there. You can see over here I've got my planned takeoff fuel 5,383 kilogram, then we got the taxi fuel down there, and if we add both of the two together, then we end up with a 5,556 kilo that the FedEx suggested it would load into the airplane. Now, that is correct, but that is the minimum amount of fuel you need to have on board your airplane when you start the pushback. So far so good. So why is that a problem then? The problem is the fuel is loaded exactly to the kilo, and that is not only the case in the FedEx Airbus. Don't get me wrong, over here I'm not trying to blame the FedEx, this is just an example because it has the nicest visualization of these things, but the actual problem happens in most aircraft that import weights from SimBrief. They load fuel down to the kilo that is required as the minimum. However, what happens then is you start the APU starts using fuel, and all of a sudden you find yourself below the required minimum. Now in my case I've been doing a pre-flight for approximately half an hour over here, and I had my APU running with air conditioning enabled as the weather is rather cold outside at just 3 degrees, and I didn't want my passengers to board into an icy airplane. So the APU has been running, and it's been running its maximum demand using bleed air for half an hour, and you can see the effect on the fuel that this had. On the left tank we got 1,980 kilos, on the right tank we got 2,080 kilos. In other words, the APU has used 100 kilograms of fuel during the pre-flight already. Now, those 100 kilograms are missing from the minimum amount of fuel that we're legally required to take when we start the pushback, so when we go off block. That is when we need to have the minimum amount of block fuel on board. And that is missing 100 kilograms fuel now. For that reason we are no longer legal, and we need to call the fuel truck again in order to fuel this back up. Now you can see where this is going. You need to load more fuel than the minimum SimBrief suggested. Now here's a couple of ballpark figures that you can use in most narrow body aircraft. So in the A320 and in the 737, the APU uses approximately 200 kilograms of fuel per hour if you are running it with bleed air enabled, and about 120-140 if you are running it without bleed air. So be sure to load that on, keeping in mind the minimum amount of fuel for your pushback. So if you are doing pre-flights of about half an hour time, be sure to load at least 100 kilogram more fuel than SimBrief suggests if you do plan on using the APU. But even if you're just using the APU like, for example, my former operator did, you just start it when the rent agent leaves the airplane after you got the load sheet, well, even then you will still need a couple of fuel for your pushback or for your APU prior to that. So if you load exactly down to the kilo, you will be illegal on your push. Now, another thing for us to consider over here is more of a real-world item, but refuelers do not really load the airplane exactly. So let's say your minimum fuel was 5,400 kilos. You tell them you want 5,400 kilos. Well, they will try their best in order to load the airplane as accurate as possible, but the delay on the fuel gauges alone means that they will never be able to load it to the exact kilo. There will always be some variance, which in my experience is usually somewhere around 30 or 40 kilograms in, for example, the Boeing 737. Now, on the Airbus A330, what they do is you tell them the minimum of fuel you want, they just set 300 kilograms more on the fuel panel, so that the computer of the Airbus is just going to load 300 kilos more into the plane than what you've actually ordered. And, well, like that, you can be sure that you've got at least the bare minimum when the refueling is completed. So, remember, those things are aircraft. They aren't perfect machines, but they do have some inaccuracies there as well. Now, in the real world, what we did then, if we had a planned fuel of 5,556 over here, now, in my new airline, that isn't too much of a concern. You simply load whatever you like. So, for example, this one might round it up 5.6, 5.7, or maybe just 6 tons, because hey, why not? Now, in my former airline, which was a little bit more fuel conservative, the policy was to round it up to the next hundreds, and then you could add another 100 kilos to that as well, before you would have to start explaining why you took extra fuel. So, for example, what we would have done in 99% of the cases is, you've got 5,556 kilograms planned block fuel, you round it up 5.6, you add up 100 kilos, 5.7, and then you would load 5.7 tons of fuel into the tanks. That would not only cover the APU usage, but it would also cover the case that the fueler might load a little bit less fuel than you want. So, the 30 or 40 kilos I mentioned earlier that are usually a difference in fuel, they don't just overfuel the plane by that, they might also underfuel it by that quantity. So, if you followed the manuals down to the letter in my former airline, and you had 5,556 required, as you have over here, and you would tell the fueler, I want 5.6 tons of fuel, the fueler might give you 5,550 kilos because of refueling error. That simply happens because the gauges aren't that accurate, and the gauges on the outside on the wing might read a little bit different fuel quantity than those on the inside, and overall quantities simply aren't an exact measurement in aircraft. So you might get 5,550 kilos rather than 5,600 as you ordered, and all of a sudden you're illegal because you've got 6 kilograms less fuel. So make your life easy. If you've got a value like this, order 5.7, so round it up to the next 100, add 100 kilos, and in narrow body aircraft, that's usually going to cover the APU usage, and that is also going to cover a possible refueling error. So that's this one. I would like to thank you very much for watching. Hope that you found it interesting and hope that you learned something over here. If you did, be sure to leave a comment below to let me know your experience with this. If you're a real pilot, then do let me know how you are running the refueling theory, and if you are doing anything different, or if your airline might require you to do something different. Finally, be sure to like the video if you did indeed like it, as it does really help out the channel, and if you're up for more, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Finally, if you really love what I'm doing, I would appreciate a small donation through the Buy Me Coffee link in the video description below. Thank you very much for watching, and I see you all again on the next one.